We occasionally too easily throw words around. I'm as guilty as anybody. Sometimes it is the careless slip of the tongue, and other times we intentionally use wordplay for humorous or serious effect. I dare you to tune into a sports broadcast, usually a football game, and not hear somebody say adversity. As Peter Griffin might say, that really grinds my gears. There is no adversity in sports. Tough breaks, bad calls, yep, every game. Adversity in a game? You know who has adversity? The family with a loved one who has a cancer diagnosis. Any person grappling with a debilitating disease. The person who can't work enough hours to make ends meet. Refugees fleeing war. My friend Rudy, who has served in 2 wars. Every person who never returned from war and their families. A dropped pass, a missed tackle, a blowout loss in a playoff game? Not even in the same language. This letter attributed to Peter the disciple mentions adversity the early Christians were enduring. Perhaps not so helpfully, he essentially says, oh, you think you got it bad now. Just imagine if you weren't suffering. Doesn't sound like a very good sales pitch, does it? In Peter's day, Christ followers could experience adversity in a variety of ways. They might have been shunned by their families, harassed by their neighbors, fired by their boss. During the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian, towards the end of the 1st century, that's when the state-sanctioned persecution of Christians began. And so this letter even predates that. You know, these folks knew all about adversity. In the early church communities, there wasn't supposed to be any social ladder of the rich on top and the poor on the bottom. No separation of the smart ones up front and the less gifted in the back. In the early church, it didn't matter what bolt of cloth you were cut from. Everyone had something to contribute and was part of the fabric of the community. Peter's letter talks quite a bit about suffering. Some kind of suffering was more or less part of the experience of being a follower of Christ. Peter says that if you're going to be taking care of the poor of body and spirit, if you're going to reach out to the people that society has shoved off to the margins because they are somehow different, you are going to pay a price for it. You can expect adversity and a sacrifice. Memorial Day weekend has become a time of leisure for most Americans because someone else sacrificed too high a price for us. Decoration Day was observed by many communities in the North and the South after the Civil War. Decoration Day eventually became Memorial Day on May 30th. There were solemn parades, the laying of wreaths, and speeches by veterans and politicians and, yes, preachers. Then Congress moved it to the last Monday in May to create a 3-day weekend that officially began nationwide in 1971. Businesses soon took advantage of the date change to advertise the kickoff of summer, noting that Americans weren't participating in Memorial Day observances like they used to. Congress passed the National Moment of Remembrance Act in the year 2000, asking people to stop and remember at 3 p.m. Yes, Congress that exists because someone else died for their purpose had dumbed it down to a memorial moment. A minute or a part of a day to remember the sons and daughters who have died in wars isn't a sacrifice. Not by any measure. When a loved one dies, do you forget them? Of course not. It is proven that the more that a loved one is recalled by name by people who knew them, the healthier it is for anyone who grieves. Don't you think that would be especially true for the families who sent their cherished loved one off to war, never to see them alive again? So today, we are going to recall by name a young man that I'm guessing none of us have ever met. Theodore Graham, whose family still runs the farm on Kirk Road in North Jackson. Ted was born December 30th, 1919 in Diamond. He graduated from Jackson Milton High School in 1939. Ted worked the family farm and then would deliver produce to the Piatt Street Market in Youngstown and other locations. One of those places was a little fruit stand in Liberty, where a pretty girl by the name of Virginia Taylor worked. She was still in high school when they met. As he drove away one day, she said, "I'm going to marry that man." Like countless other couples, World War II interrupted. Ted reported for duty on July 29, 1942. After basic training, he received the necessary recommendations to enter Army Aviation Cadet training as a tail gunner on a B-26 Marauder. Ted rose to the rank of corporal. On November 23, 1943, he sent a telegram to his parents from Gainesville, Florida, that said simply, "Married, 7 o'clock tonight. Letter will follow." Virginia had quit her job and headed to Florida, a young woman traveling alone, switching trains in the dark of night multiple times to fulfill her wish to marry that man. How romantic is that? Virginia and Ted were able to live together until he was transferred to Barksdale Field in Louisiana. So she moved back here to live with the Grahams on the farm. The B-26 had a reputation that earned it the nickname the Widowmaker. On November 6, 1944, during a training flight about 20 miles north of Shreveport, Louisiana, Ted and 6 fellow crew members were killed when their bomber crashed into a ravine. 4 weeks earlier, Ted's daughter Margaret had been born. He never met her. When we talked on the phone the other day, the loss still brought Margaret to tears. "I don't know why I'm crying," she said. Ted was planning on returning to farming after the war. Instead, Virginia became a bride, a mother, and a widow, all in 1 year's time. Some people have experienced the true measure of sacrifice. This cross was given by the Graham family in honor of Ted's memory. Who knows how many times at worship services his family attended that their thoughts drifted off to a time when they were all together. Ted's family undoubtedly found strength in sharing this symbol of Jesus' sacrifice, knowing that for generations his sacrifice too would be recalled. On Memorial Day, the American flag is raised briskly to the top of the pole and then lowered solemnly to half-staff. According to the U.S. Code, and I quote, "The half-staff position remembers the more than 1 million men and women who gave their lives in service of their country. At noon, their memory is raised by the living, who resolve not to let their sacrifice be in vain, but to rise up in their stead and continue the fight for liberty and justice for all." So I hope you will be observing Memorial Day by attending or participating in a parade or a ceremony. I hope you will teach children why they don't get showered with candy at a Memorial Day parade, or at least they shouldn't. Let's quit confusing the words sacrifice and sharing. Sacrifice, as I mean it here, is sharing, but merely sharing isn't necessarily sacrifice. Let's not overstate the impact our giving of a little time has on our personal convenience. Rather, let's concentrate on the good our sharing can be for those who receive the gift. Let us resolve not to let the sacrifice of our nation's war dead be in vain, but to rise up in their stead and continue the fight for liberty and justice for all. Amen.